Hello and welcome to Mr. C History. Now, you join me in Primrose Street, just around the back of Liverpool Street Station, and I am on the trail of one of my heroines, Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft is considered one of the original first feminist political thinkers. That's definitely true, but I also think of her as one of the main first liberal thinkers. This time she was writing the 1780s, 1790s, a time of enlightenment. She was one of the key bastions in that pantheon. So no, let's not put her in a box, let's celebrate her. She also had an interesting personal life as well, and that's one of the journeys I'm going to look at today. Now, I've decided to start here because, as I say, in 1759 she was born here. I think it probably looked a little bit different to what it was today, and her early life is an interesting story of downward social mobility. She was born into relative wealth. Her grandfather had been a successful merchant, and her father inherited that money, and unfortunately he made bad investments. He was described as a spendthrift, and indeed lost a lot of that fortune. With that, her father grew to drink an awful lot and became abusive, not only to her but also to Mary Wollstonecraft's mother, who really was affected by it. This is a very interesting time as well, because Mary saw these sort of male figures in her life really negatively. Obviously her father, for obvious reasons. Her brother as well. She was the eldest daughter, but she had an elder brother. He was going to inherit everything. She was going to get nothing. And I think she looked at this as a deeply unfair part of society. Why were women so downtrodden? And indeed she obviously had to fulfill this motherly role because her mother was so brutally affected by her father's, or her husband Mary's father's behaviour. So Mary is galvanised for this idea of self-reliance. She knows that she needs to get out of this environment. She needs to pick herself up and go for it. And so she decides to go to Ireland to become a governess. Now, Mary returned from Ireland despondent because she had had her life as a governess, looking after children, looking after a house, etc. And this made her very unhappy because she felt, is this it for women? Is this all that's available to them if they're not provided with an education? So to that end, she returns back to London, specifically here to Newington Green, near the Stoke Newington area, and sets up a school for young girls and women. And indeed, there's a plaque just over there in what looks like a school building that could possibly date from the 1780s. Where she set up her school. Now, with this came lots of voracious reading. Mary was quite clearly a keen reader of political and philosophical thought. Indeed, she read Rousseau, but specifically she read John Locke, and this idea, who was a key liberal thinker at the time, this time of enlightenment, the 1780s, 1790s. John Locke's key idea was that in many ways human beings are a blank slate. When we're born, we have nothing put upon us. It is our reason, our rationality, our humanness comes from our experiences, and crucially our education, which links back to Mary again. She felt that women were downtrodden because of the lack of education. I'll talk about that further when we look at the vindication of the rights of women. But it was here in Newington Green where she did a lot of that reading, and actually she also did a lot of talking and debating with other philosophers at the time, specifically here in this building. This is where Mary would have come along. And it says Unitarian. It was indeed a Unitarian chapel, also known as the Church of Dissenters. What were they doing? They were dissenting against the normality of Christian belief. They dissented against superstition, against the angels and all that sort of communion side of things and the bread of Christ. They felt they firmly believed in the Christian mission, the mission to educate, etc., etc. And they felt that again, that is what you're not necessarily born with your reason. No, it's not necessarily God-given. It comes to you through your experiences, through your education. This is radical, and many of the philosophers at the time felt that this was going to be the rights of men. And now Mary Wollstonecraft comes in and says, well, what about women? Surely women are also part of this procedure. Where do women get their experiences from? And indeed, this comes politically as well. Those Unitarian thinkers at the time would have felt that people should not be governed by a church, by God, or indeed by a monarch who is God-given. They should be governed by ourselves, a democracy. My goodness me. Remember, this is the time of the French Revolution, 1789. The American Revolution's come about, US Constitution's written, all men are created equal. Well, what about women? Are all women also created equal to men? And so this is perhaps why Newington Green is sometimes called the birthplace of feminism, because Mary Wollstonecraft was here at this chapel really pushing forward these ideas, speaking out about this, and speaking up for women's rights as part of this revolutionary movement comes about. Now, also here at Newington Green is actually apparently a statue of Mary Wollstonecraft. Indeed, there is a plaque to her here, and there is a female figure at the top, which you can zoom in on. Is that Mary? Possibly. I don't, it's quite abstract. But most importantly, there is a wonderful quote here, which I think really does sum up Mary Wollstonecraft fantastically well, where it says, "I do not wish women to have power over men, but over themselves." That is key tenet to Mary Wollstonecraft's political thought. Now, with that voracious reading also came voracious writing, and much of it took place here, Dolben Street in Southwark. It's quite away from Newington Green, and this happened to be quite nearby to where her publisher was. Now, as I say, she wrote voraciously. She wrote novels, she wrote children's books, but this was the time of pamphlets. This is the time of the French Revolution, Enlightenment, American Revolution. People were writing these sort of slightly longer essays about various different political thoughts. And one of those people actually was Edmund Burke. He was a conservative thinker, and he looked at the French Revolution and he said, this is terrible. He said that society is built on traditional values, Christianity, the institution of marriage, things like that, and where the traditional place of men and women. As you can imagine, Mary didn't take kindly to this, and she wrote a scathing rebuttal to this, and this was called the Vindication of the Rights of Men. And in this she said, absolutely not. Rights, individual rights are perfect. Women shouldn't be subjugated, etc., etc. Now this is amazing, obviously, because this is the 1780s, late 1780s, early 1790s, and Mary is taking on, Edmund Burke, taking on this figure of the Enlightenment, this sort of traditional male figure. She's not afraid to do it in any way. She's really pushing those boundaries and values perfectly. So that's amazing, and I think that really sums up Mary's determination at this time. This is Store Street in Bloomsbury, and now this has a very significant place in the history of Mary Wollstonecraft, because it was for 6 weeks here in early 1792, somewhere along this street, she wrote her key piece of work, The Vindication of the Rights of Women, the piece of work she's most noted for. Now, this is often called the first feminist text, and it is interesting. It's not perhaps what you might think. It's not necessarily demanding women's civil or political rights, the right to vote or rights within marriage. That's not really mentioned, I suppose, in many ways, because this is so early. Feminism is such an early idea. It's more, actually maybe slightly more radical. It's all about changing society, changing women's position in society. And Mary, as I've mentioned before, and we keep talking, Mary is very much focused on education. It's because women are not educated properly, it's the reason they have accepted, they've learnt what their position in society is, and they've learnt that they can't go beyond that their education has restricted it from them, that Lockean idea of, that we discussed in Newington Green. Also very much employs the metaphor of petticoats and corsets. Women are literally, forced into these corsets, restricted, but also she uses that metaphorically. They're hemmed in, they're broke, can't move from within their social ranks. She wants to break out of it. How can women do that in the 1790s? And Mary's view is education, education, education. This is number 26 Charlotte Street, and in 1795 Mary moved in here with her on-again, off-again partner Gilbert Imlay. I'll talk about their relationship in a moment, but they crucially met in Paris. Why was Mary in Paris? Well, I've already spoken about her interest in the French Revolution, her attack on Burke, but indeed in 1792 she moved to Paris. Why? Well, she was fascinated, and she really supported the idea of rights, the rights that were being protected in the French Revolution, this focus on individual rights, this liberalism coming through. Unfortunately, though, she was horrified by what she'd seen. 1792 was a key turning point in the French Revolution, the Directory getting its full force, the beginning of the Terror, the Regicide was about to happen, England declaring war on France, and indeed that actually eventually pushed Mary out. And the start of that guillotining and Robespierre and his full romp. So I think she really was really horrified by what she'd seen. But she did meet a man, as I say, Gilbert Imlay, who was, best we can describe him as a chancellor. He says sometimes considered a diplomat, and he was crucially, I forgot to say, he was an American diplomat in Paris. Moved here to London, but their relationship was not great, and it led to a potentially tragic moment in Mary's life. In October of 1795, Mary Wollstonecraft got off a boat, having been in Sweden, to discover that her partner and her father of her child, Gilbert Imlay, had been having an affair with a London actress. She was distraught and unbelievably despondent, so she came here to Putney Bridge. And In an act of desperation, she jumped into the River Thames in a suicide attempt. She was at the nadir of her life. Thankfully, she survived. Why? Well, it's actually interesting. Her dress, her petticoat, was one of those billowing dresses at the time, filled with air pockets. She was able to bob along. She was pulled out of the river unconscious, and she was taken to the Duke's Head just over there, and she was revived by some boatmen. But a desperate time in Mary's life. She now needs a time of reflection and calm in her life. This is Oakshott Court in the area known as Somerstown. By the late 1790s, after the tumult that her life had had, Mary had settled down and had moved here. And indeed, she had started a relationship with the fellow philosopher William Godwin. Now, actually, he was quite well known in his time, again in these liberal thinking circles, and they actually met at a dinner party hosted by Thomas Paine, the great liberal thinker of the Enlightenment. So this was a relationship, yes, built on love, but also built on this amazing intellectual communion. Anyway, what was interesting about those two is they both didn't believe in the institution of marriage. They felt that feminist idea of that marriage subjugates women. Despite that, however, they do get married. Maybe it's because they were expecting a child. Mary was indeed pregnant. And Mary did have that child, a young girl, who will go on to become Mary Shelley, the lady who wrote Frankenstein, and the child was born here, but sadly tragedy did strike. 11 days after Mary Shelley was born, Mary Wollstonecraft dies here at home in Somerstown and is buried in St Pancras Old Church Gardens, which let's go there now to talk about her legacy.
There is a nice mural by Oakshott Court of people who lived in the Somerstown area, and I think actually one of them is Mary. She might be this person on the balcony here, or she might be part of the argy-bargy that's here. But Oakshott Court has changed quite a lot since the 1780s. I think the Luftwaffe had played a part in that.
So here we are, this rather sort of sad, slightly forgotten gravestone here, sort of in a bit of mud and puddle, etc. This is the original burial place of Mary Wollstonecraft. I say original, why? Well, because about 50 years after her death, in 1797 was her death, her grandson, Percy Shelley, moved all of the people here, because there was Mary Godwin as well, Mary Shelley, I think, as well, the writer of Frankenstein, they were buried here. He moved them all to one big plot in Bournemouth. So she is now technically there, but this is where she was originally buried. And she died aged 38, as I say, in childbirth, quite a very, very early age. What is her legacy? Well, I think a very important one. I think at first she was very much respected in her time of when she was writing. She was respected as part of this liberal group, Thomas Paine, William Godwin, etc. Immediately afterwards, though, it wasn't so great. William Godwin, he published a biography of her and published some of her unwritten works. Now, actually, these unwritten works, there was a reason why they weren't published perhaps by her, because they were quite radical. They were very much what modern feminists would recognise. And immediately after her death, she actually got a bit of stick from many people. And that sort of the patriarchy of the Victorian period, that rampant capitalism, etc., did shun her a bit. She was a bit of a hero of the Chartist movement and indeed the Americans in the lead up to the Civil War, but largely in the 19th century, certainly in this country, she was forgotten. It wasn't really until the suffrage movement, and indeed many of the early suffrage movements, they had posters saying Mary Wollstonecraft legend, I think, or something like that. And of course, New Wave feminism post-1950s, etc., have used her a lot. So she's very much considered this a key feminist writer. I definitely would agree with that, but I think we shouldn't keep, as I keep saying, we shouldn't put her too much in the box of just being a feminist writer. She was also a very key thinker and writer, full stop, certainly in the liberal school of thought. And so she should be also seen for the huge impact she had in that area. But as I say, this is perhaps a rather sad, slightly forgotten memorial to her. Well, anyway, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I have. I certainly did. Please, as always, don't forget to subscribe, and I shall see you on the next one. Bye for now.